you have, I don't know what episode you said earlier, but I've listened to probably 200 of the two. What is it? How many have you done?
Are you serious?
Yes.
This is 256.
And my favorites, by the way, are always the women, like the background singers and musicians who worked with them, because like there's always this undercurrent of like they were such lovely boys, which and Axel is a lovely young, it was a lovely man. And the truth is that's my experience for virtually all of the time, but no one would believe you. No one would believe you that they're a Menchie band. They were like a great group of young lads. Now, that doesn't mean they weren't, smacked out of their minds, some of them at certain times, but even then they were a pretty lovely group of guys that changed my life. And so, yeah, those are always my favorite episodes. But yeah, at a certain point, I think maybe 150 episodes in, I was like, how come I never have been asked? Only because I think that interview, what's funny is at the time, it was like, it seemed like, he was about to put out a record. Instead, it was, I don't even know I think it was like another 7-8 years or whatever.
This is, and because I don't want to lose it, the interview we're talking about that you did with Axl Rose from Rolling Stone came out 2000. And a few things I want to mention, and because, oh my God, because I reread it again today, that Axl at the time was 36. I'm 37. So just to think about the Axl Rose at my age is just blowing my mind. But yeah, 2000, and you had quoted not just Axl, but our friend Doug Goldstein, and thinking that, it was just around the corner. The music's done, vocals are 80% done, thinking, it's summer release. 8 years later, it would come out.
I heard the record. I heard an album, and but yeah, let me give you the background if that's okay. The background is like, that was actually just a big moment in a long relationship that I was the music editor at Rolling Stone when Guns N' Roses hit. And to give credit where it was due, I'm not like, I'm more of a Stones kind of guy than, I'm not at all a metal guy. But my assistant at the time was a woman named Kim Neely, who went on to become a writer, especially in sort of the hard rock world. And she said, David, you got to check out this Guns N' Roses, like when the record came in. And I really liked it. And especially because I'm a song guy, when I heard Sweet Child of Mine, I was like, well, where is this guy coming from? So when they ended up, on the tour with Aerosmith, like I think I'd done a cover story on Aerosmith for Rolling Stone. Okay. And then I was invited to go to that show, and I was brought back to meet them at Giant Stadium. And I looked up, to try to like keep track of my life. I looked at some of these dates, and it's all like, I realized what a big part of my life this band was. But so I went back and met them, and I loved Axl from the moment I met him. To be honest, at that moment, that was when they were being kept separate from Aerosmith, who were trying to keep clean.
Right.
And they were they were exploding, the opening exploding act on the bill. And they were exploding in many ways because virtually no one in the band was capable of speech except Axl. And you couldn't not have a great conversation with him. I remember vividly, we immediately bonded over our love of 3 bands: the Raspberries, who were my first band, so the power pop, like defining Raspberries, Nazareth, who to this day, I've always said, that's where the biggest vocal influence on Axl that you never really hear about, and it was interesting that he had that incredible run, successful run with AC/DC, because to me, I grew up as a kid loving AC/DC and Nazareth, and to me, Dan from Nazareth is like Axl's, like the most direct antecedent to Axl's vocal style. And then we both loved the Pet Shop Boys to show his range and also his interest in sort of electronic textures that would figure later when you get to Chinese Democracy. But we just had this incredible conversation while everyone else was sort of nodding off in the dressing room, like literally, they couldn't speak. And then, so that was the first meeting I ever had. And I just loved the guy. He was, the thing that never comes across in the legend, other than on your show, to your credit, like some of the people who played with them, you get that how he was, because there's all the loaded stuff of like, was this lyric show he was a racist or that he was a psychotic guy or whatever. The truth is, one-on-one to talk to, in my experience, he's like a lovely guy, like really smart, not from a background that, I think from a rough background, and I don't know exactly what traumas happened, but you could feel he's a guy who'd been through a lot, but had a lot to give and a huge talent. So then that was the first time we met. I will ignore that. Cut to—
That's all right. It's Axel. He hears you.
Yeah. Oh, believe me, that's possible.
He's like, stop talking about me.
Well, in fact, I was going to do this in my backyard, and I had a flashback to being in my backyard, being interviewed about Axl and Guns N' Roses by Jake Tapper, who then was at VH1. There's some VH1 Jake Tapper special from like 2006 where Jake sat in my backyard asking me tough questions about Axl. So that's very possible.
That's
I think
so
he was
weird.
mad about that one.
Okay.
So cut to the next brush was like there was a Rolling Stone party, and now Guns N' Roses are the biggest band in the world, and there's a Rolling Stone advertising party that none of the writers are at, and Axl is, I guess, walking in the Village past the Ritz, I guess it was. He rushed into a Rolling Stone party, and in front of like 1,000 advertising people, the biggest rock star in the world went, "Is David Wild here? I like that dude." So for that next month, I was like considered a cool guy, which has never happened before or since. So that was the beginning of like a sort of the moment when Guns N' Roses were just ruling the world. And I assigned a cover story. And then the craziness started, which was, and again, it's the craziness that came from the band, but also the craziness of the desperation to profit from the band, because Axl and the management and Doug, we should, I'd love to talk to Doug about this because I always got along great with him.
He says hello. He says hello.
Oh, good. Yeah. I think we always had we always got along great.
I'll give you, he said, give him my number. So
okay.
Afterwards.
But Doug also, and I think this would be interesting to get his perspective, I think they were starting to have to communicate some crazy stuff. Like at a certain point, it was like, Axl doesn't want a writer from Rolling Stone. He wants, Del James to do the interview. He wants Robert John, people like in his camp to take the pictures. And to be fair, I think because the first issue maybe sold huge amounts, we probably gave into too much of that. But the relationship with Rolling Stone, and if I'm telling you too much of this, you can stop me, but the relationship with Rolling Stone—
No, you're fine, unless you would be the one telling me to stop. If you're telling me too much.
So eventually it reached a point where I went to cover the band at Rock in Rio. And this was the original, sort of the latter day of the original sort of guys, where Slash was still in the band. I think it was sort of the end of, as they were beginning to fall apart with the sort of big version of the band with background singers and all of that. But I went to Rock in Rio, and that was the point at which the band announced, to interview us, you have to sign this paper that says, if you use a quote, we get quote approval. And if you use a quote we don't like, you have to pay us, I forget what it was. It was like $100,000. It was something that literally no journalist in the world could ever sign. And I only wish, if I could go back in time, I would have, and I think we probably did try to explain, you can't do this. You'll never talk to another journalist. But that sort of was, I do remember being in Rio, and I think slipping Axl a copy of a Nazareth record I found in Rio, like some import or something, saying, I'd love to talk to you, but I can't sign this contract. And so that was sort of a moment where things went off the wall, a little crazy for a time. And eventually that was the beginning of the band falling apart.